there is an open source version over here of something called the Bloomberg Terminal. I don't know if you've heard about Bloomberg Terminal, but it is a technology that a lot of the big dogs kind of use. Then they have open on the screen all the time, but it costs quite a bit of money, right? So it's a $55,000 cost for a 2-year lease. To my understanding, I don't think you can rent this month by month. You got to get the thing for the whole 2 years, but on a monthly basis, that comes down to 2.3K per month just for access to this Bloomberg terminal. Okay, so pretty darn expensive. So we've got a community of people here that basically created this thing called OpenBB for Open Bloomberg Terminal, and they have a whole pile of features and functionality that's been added over here. It's all been written up in Python. It's all open source. You can go through to the links over here, and you can even get to see the code by going to GitHub over here and looking at all the Python code, if that's what you want to do. That said, there's no need to get into that if you're not a programmer or anything like that. This is just a tool that you can use for doing any kind of analysis that you want to do. Okay, and there's over 500 features and growing. Now, obviously, I can't demonstrate everything, but I thought I would take a whole pile of screenshots and give you guys a quick walkthrough of the tool and what it potentially can do, and then from there you can go off and play with it yourself and have some fun. All right, so the first step is getting the thing installed on your computer. You don't have to worry about doing this like the old-fashioned way with having to install Python or Anaconda and then install a library and blah 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 and compile it. None of that kind of stuff. Very, very simple. You go through to this openbb.co site. From there you go to the top where it says install the terminal, and from there you'll get this page that comes up over here. You click on download for the Windows installer. You notice that you've also got installations for Mac, including the M1 chip, and obviously this can run on Linux as well. And it's just a one-click download for Windows here. Run the executable and you're done. Okay. Now, if you do want to do it the old-fashioned way, you can flip through to saying you want to do it through Anaconda, which is basically the concept of installing the library yourself. And they've got a third option that if you want to store this in a Docker container, I won't get into what that is, but it's just a way of kind of like segregating. Think of it kind of like a virtual machine almost, right? But they've got Docker availability as well. But for the majority of you, you're just going to say, give me an installer, click on download. It downloads an exe. From there, you double click on the exe. You're going to get a window like this, which might sound scary, but it basically says, defend a smart screen, prevented an unrecognized app from starting. Are you sure you want to put your computer at risk? All that's going on here is that the executable, which is this guy, the executable that you're actually running is not recognized by Microsoft as being digitally signed. So you can see here it says publisher is OpenBB, right? But this guy, this entity, hasn't officially registered themselves with Microsoft to be, let's just say, recognized as a valid entity, because you got to pay a whole bunch of money for that kind of stuff too. Okay, so they're not, open source, they're not willing to do that. So what will happen when you double click on the executable is that you'll see this window over here. All you got to do is click on more info and then say run anyway. And when you do that, the thing will install. Okay, but and again, you've got full access to review all of the source code if you're concerned, I guess. So but it's fine. So then the wizard will come up. You're going to click on next. You then decide on which folder you want to put it in. In my case over here, I just put it into my utils folder on my C drive. You can put it wherever the heck you want. Click on install and the thing is done. Okay. From there, you simply click on the Windows button, type OpenBB, and then you'll see that there's an application now called OpenBB Terminal. Click on that, and then that will start up your window that looks like this. Okay. Now it's called terminal for a reason. It doesn't have all the fancy graphical user interfaces that you might normally get to see, but Let me just change my color here in case I got a scribble. All right. But you'll see that you get this thing over here called terminal, and then from there it's going to tell you a whole bunch of commands that you can put in. And you know, the key thing is that these are the main categories of things that you can get into, and then when you get into a category, it expands out through to giving you a whole bunch of commands that are specific through to that category that you've selected. Right? Other than that, you can see that you can do something like, say, CLS to clear the screen, and the other one that you'll be using a lot, I mean, I don't tend to use type help, I tend to basically just use this one over here, just typing question mark. So if at any point you have a command prompt like you see down here, and let's pretend that you did a CLS to clear the screen, you're now going to have none of this information available. You'll just have a bare bones command prompt that looks like this. But if you want to get the information up, all you do is you type in the question mark, press enter, and then you'll get a menu that looks something like this, that tells you what you can do within the level that you're currently at. All right. Also, notice that when you are looking at the command prompt, if you look down here, this thing over here tells you where you are. So if you're familiar with navigating through MS-DOS or something like that with subdirectories, you can see this thing over here means that you're at the top level, and from the top level you've now got access through to all of these things that you can select to get in through to that particular category. Okay, you'll see later on you can also put in like a full kind of like path name to something that you want to do. So if you know that there's a function inside of stocks that's called blah, right? You can jump, and let's say that you're currently inside of crypto, right? So if you're in crypto, you'll see this thing crypto, you'll be at this kind of level over here, and if suddenly you want to flip over through the stocks, you can just type /stocks over here, and you'll now jump from the crypto level over through the stocks level. You don't have to navigate back up to the root and then from there go into stocks. Okay. Ken is saying bottom of your screen is cut off. Oh, okay. How far down can you see? Can you see the command prompt down the bottom? Ken? You cannot. That's interesting. All right. Brandon's saying that it might be. All right. Everyone else is saying that they can't see it, so you may have to just adjust your size of the window. Again, just go full screen. It's probably the easiest thing to do. Okay. All right, so let's start going through this stuff and getting you familiar with how to play with it. So here I've just typed stocks, and you can see that when you do that, you then get to see the full menu of all of the things you can do inside of stocks. Whenever you see this thing over here, think of that as a menu. Okay? And if you go into that menu, you'll then get a whole pile of extra options that you can drill in through to for that specific area. And you can see here, it's going to tell you what the command is that you give it in order to get you into that menu. It's going to give you a description of what that thing is, and examples or whatever over here on the right. So you can see here, if I type TH, that's going to get me in through to the ability to see the trading hours for whatever it is that I want to look at. And here's the description letting you know that you're checking that. Now you'll see that you've got stuff over here in blue and stuff over here in gray. What is that? Well, that is because the stuff that's in blue is stuff that, think of it as being active, stuff that you can do, whereas the stuff that's gray is stuff you can't do yet. And the reason for that is because I have just gotten in through to the stocks subsection, but I haven't told it which stock I want to look at. Okay, so when we're looking at stuff like this, this includes things like trying to search for stocks, right? Look, I want to find a stock that has high short interest or something like that. So I can go in through to this discovery section and search for a stock that matches that criteria. Okay, or I might want to go into looking at the dark pools, or look at insider trading, or comparison analysis, whatever, and then this is a way of me hunting for a stock that I want to do further digging into. Whereas the bottom part over here is stuff that is specific through to a stock, but I haven't yet told it which stock I want to look at, and that's why it's grayed out. Okay, so what we're going to do here next is, or actually I'll get through to choosing stocks or whatever, but you can see here this is just an example of me after being, so I'm currently in the stocks level, and you can see that one of the things that I can do is I've got a thing over here called options that lets me get into the options section, and I can see things like chains, open interest, Greeks, parity, and whatever. To get into it, all I have to do is type this command. Okay, so I do that, I type options, and now I get to see the whole pile of commands that are available for options. And notice if I see these symbols, those symbols essentially imply that it's a menu. Okay, so these are the things that I can do at this level, and these are other sub menus that I can get into that then take me even deeper in through to the path that I'm actually on right now. Okay. Now, if I go back, you'll see that when we're looking at something like this, which says, right, if you go into a PCR, then that is going to give you put-call ratio information for a specific ticker, but it then tells you where it's grabbing that information from in terms of its source. Okay. Now, things like Alpha Query, Bar Chart, Yahoo Finance, and some others on here, they're all free. So when it comes to something that is free, it doesn't require any specific access key of any kind. So we can basically just get to it without any kind of hassle. But this service has the ability of tying in through to other services, let's just put it that way. And those other services don't necessarily charge you money for anything, but they do require you to have a key in order to access their service. And the primary reason they do that is to make sure that you're not flooding them with requests, and they can kind of track you for compliance on you being a good citizen and not spamming them, all that kind of stuff with requests and suddenly flooding everything for everybody else. Give me a second here. All right, so one of the things that you'll want to do at the start, and which I'd recommend, is to go in and configure yourself to have access through to as many of the separate services that they can hook into. Okay, so to do that, you're going to type keys, and when you type in keys over here, it's going to say, all right, here's the full list of services over here that do require a key in order for OpenBB to interact with. Okay, and you can see here that all of them are currently not defined because this is a fresh install. Okay, the only thing that is configured over here is this ETH Plura, which I hadn't manually configured, but for some reason it was already pre-configured, so they must have a generic kind of key that is built in. Okay, but for everything else, so things like the Fred database, which you get a whole pile of government type stats of unemployment rates and interest rates and all that kind of stuff. Quandl, which has a ton of different feeds that you can hook into. Alpha Vantage for things like price information. Tradia, right, which gives you access through to various types of option trading stats. IEX information, social media stuff like Reddit and Twitter. So you can see what people are tweeting about and get sentiment information, a whole pile of interesting stuff. So if you want to get access through to as much functionality as possible, you want to basically go through and add keys for all the stuff that's of interest to you through here. Okay, so all you got to do, again, you type keys to be able to see what the options are for you to configure. And then you're going to be typing, these are commands after all, right? You type in one of these commands, and then it's going to say, right, fine, well, now tell me what the key is that you should be using for your account. So you can see here, I've gone in and I've typed Tradia. And when I type Tradia, it says to get your API key, API stands for Application Programming Interface, but don't worry about that. It's just the name of the key, okay, that you need. So for your API key, visit this website. So from here, you just go to the website that they tell you, sign up or whatever for a free account, and then typically you're going to be going in through to your profile. Okay, you go to the website, and typically your profile icon might be here on the top right. You click on your profile link, and then there'll be something like settings or something similar to that, and then you go into settings, and then you just look around for the option that says something like API key for you. Some sites have like a generate button that you got to click, and then from there you get a big long API key, and then all you got to do is you grab that API key, copy it, and you're then going to bring that back in through to this OpenBB program, and just telling the program what your API key is for that particular service. All right, it's obviously going to vary site by site, but that's essentially the concept. It's just a bit time consuming to do the very first time, but you only do it once and that's it. Okay, so you can see here again, I went into keys. I told it which system I want to configure API access to. In this case, I've said Tradier. I went through the Tradier, found my key, and then here, all I had to do to enter my key is I then typed Tradier space, and then I provided my actual key. I've blurred it out here for security reason, but basically you just type out your full key, paste it, press enter, and then once you've done that, notice that it says it's now been defined, and it's run a test that it can actually use that key successfully, and therefore it says test passed. Okay, here you can see me basically typing the question mark to get access to the full menu, and when I do that, you can see now that I get to see my full list, but now Tradier is now configured. So all of the functionality that they now have that hooks into Tradier, I've now unlocked. Okay, and then you just go through and do the rest, one by one. So I went through, and these are the ones that I configured for my account, and all the ones that are in green are the ones that I've configured, and I've got some that are not defined. Primarily they're Bitcoin type stuff related that I don't particularly care about at this point. I may configure it later, but that's what I have done. Okay, so you just go through, do them one by one. All right, now that we've got our keys done, the next thing is to go through and tell it which stock we want to focus on. Now, of course, I can go through and use any of these commands over here, or get into these menus and then type in whatever command to hunt for something, right? I might want to find, I don't know, the strongest trending, or the ones that have unusual option activity, whatever that might be, or insider trading, in order to find a particular ticker. And but then once I have a ticker, then I can use these commands down here to do more in-depth analysis on those tickers. But remember that the reason that this thing over here is gray is because we haven't yet told it what it is we want, what the ticker is that we want to focus on. To do that, we're going to be using these commands up here. All right, now remember that we're inside of the stock section. So you can see here I've got the ability to say search, and this is when you want to search for a ticker but you don't know what the ticker is called. All right, or I can use the load command, and the load is the command that we'll use once we know what the ticker name is. So let's pretend that we don't know what the ticker name is yet, but I know that I want to trade, say, Amazon, right? So I'm going to go through, I say search, which was that command that we just saw, and I type in the name of the company. So I can say, search, Amazon, or search Tesla. I literally type out TSLA, right? Like the actual name of the company, not the ticker name. And then when I do that, you're going to get the full list of stuff. Notice that it's even, seeing exchanges in various other countries and all that kind of thing. But in my case over here, I'm interested in the exchange being USA based, and then from here I can see that the ticker name is called AMZN. All right, so now I know what my ticker name is, so I can go back and use that load command in order to load essentially historical data for AMZN. Okay, now notice that the command that was shown here, right, you can see that the command says load, but with all of these, or with many of these commands, they support other parameters that you can type in order to tweak that command, right? So to do that, all you got to do is do a -h after the command. So here I said load space -h, and then from here you can get to see the full list of how we can configure the command to do a whole pile of different things. So you can see I can do -t space ticker name. So here I could say, AMZN, and then that would tell it, all right, load historical data for Amazon, right? And by default, it's going to pull it from Yahoo Finance as an example. I can, if I want to, I can specify a start date. I can specify an end date. I can tell it what interval I want, right? So for intraday, you can see here I can do 1 minute, 5 minute, 15, 30, or 60-minute intervals. The default is 1440, which basically means day level information. Okay. By default, you can see here that the default source is Yahoo Finance, but if I want to, I can grab the information from other sources too. I can grab it from Alpha Vantage, from IEX, or from Polygon. Okay. And here, if you want to get monthly or weekly data, you do it like this. You can also do a range. So instead of specifying a start and an end date, you can say, just give me year to date, or give me just the past 2 years as an example. Right, and that's all we need, but I'm just going to keep it simple. All I'm going to do is I'm going to basically say load, and then I'm going to say load information from Amazon for the ticker Amazon, as you can see here, right? Load -t AMZN ticker name. Once I've done that, you can see now that it is tying in through to info here. So if I step back, see how all this stuff over here is blank, right? This is because I haven't loaded the actual ticker yet, right? But after I've loaded the data, you can see that this stuff over here is filled in, and then we get a snapshot of the performance of Amazon. So we can see, the 1 day return, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, year to date, annualized volatility, volume, and the last trading price. Okay. Now we start looking at some of these commands, and one of the commands within stocks is saying quote. If I say quote, I can now see open, high, low, close here. I can see the prior close as well, volume, 52-week high, low change in terms of nominal and as a percentage. All right, this then I can do the candle command. So here again, I'm putting the full path, right? So stocks menu and then the candle command. When I do that, you can see that it actually does have the capability of giving you visual information, not just text-based info. All right, so here you can see a full candle chart going back through to wherever it started from by default. Notice that in the original command over here, I didn't specify a start date and an end date. Okay, I could have if I wanted to pull more information, but I just did the default, and you can see over here that it's starting over here from 2019. Okay, but there's no reason that I couldn't specify a start date and therefore get much more data within this graph over here. Here I'm doing stocks and then saying news, and it's not just generic news, it's news related through to the ticker that I've loaded. Okay, and you can see here that it's now pulling all of the latest kind of news for anything that has anything to do with Apple. So iOS support, right? Stuff, stocks to watch or whatever, retailers, anything related through to Apple is going to be getting pulled in. All right, so now here we're going to look at some of the discovery stuff. So this is when you don't necessarily have a ticker in mind and you want to use some of these tools to go out and find something interesting to actually trade or look at, right? So you can see from here, if I'm in stocks, I've now gone into the discovery section. I can look at IPO dates, right? Initial public offerings, gainers, losers, undervalued stocks, stuff that's active, right? Stuff that's active based on certain funds, stuff that's trending in the news, stuff with high short interest, right? Hot penny stocks, if you're into that, and a bunch of other stuff. Right? This one over here, stocks, and then SIA. SIA is the command that I'm specifying, and then you can see here I'm now getting access through to sector and industry analysis. Right? So I can look at stuff about, various sectors, information on countries over here. I've actually got a couple of screenshots coming up rather than stepping through everything there, but you can see that there's a lot of information, right? But here's a couple of examples here. So within that same section that we were looking at before, if I go into the CPS, if I step back, you can see CPS is this command here under statistics. It shows companies per sector based on country and market cap, right? So now if I go here, you can see that, right? So now I'm basically looking at large cap companies in the US and the sectors that they're actually broken out into. Again, this is all visual information, not text based. Here I'm going to go to this command over here called see all metrics that are available, and from there you can see I get all of these commands over here that I can actually pull information. If I want to get stuff on, I don't know, earnings growth, then I use the EG command to get the best ones there. Whatever else you're interested in there, a whole bunch of, maybe book value or something. Okay, so here I'm now tying in through to another section for discovery called dark pool and short data. So dark pools is just something that some large traders or firms use to try to kind of hide what they're doing throughout the day. They basically trade on these dark pools, but these are tools that can kind of try and interact with that, because apparently they still have to report data, I believe, at the end of each day, I think. But some people kind of want to see what's going on in these dark pools and then try to, kind of copycat what's going on to try and hop on trends of companies that in theory may be trying to hide the things that they're actually investing in. So there's various things that you can tie into that, in terms of dark pool data over here. You can also tie in through to stuff from a short interest, right? So show high short interest in stocks. This, you could look at this from two perspectives. One of them is kind of like the copycat perspectives, that if a company is being shorted, you want to hop on and copycat basically the larger firms that might be shorting something, because maybe they know that this thing is going to crash. But the other thing is that if you go back to the GameStop thing that happened, what traders found was that there was just a massively high amount of short interest on GameStop, and they, the retail public basically said, all right, fine, let's go in there and do the exact opposite, and let's just all go out and buy GameStop. And then what happens is that the buying activity ends up forcing the people that are short to have to cover, and that itself generates like a huge snowball effect of more bullishness, right? Because when they cover their short positions, they're essentially buying, and that buying then generates even more pressure on the other people that are short, so then they have to cover, and so on and so on and so on. And that's why we saw GameStop just go to the moon. Okay, so it depends if you want to do a copycat or if you want to play a contrarian kind of position, but you could use this tool to try and investigate that kind of concept. So here's exactly that. So again, we're in stocks. We then did this DPS thing. We then said HSI for high short interest, and now we can see the ones that have very high short interest, right? You can go in and say Beyond Meat, and then it's up to you to decide if you want to play copycat or if you want to play a contrarian play on that. Okay, or you could even, maybe you are a contrarian, but you say, okay, so this thing is kind of going down, and you say short interest is way too high. I believe there's going to be a short covering rally, so maybe now you use some kind of TA to give you a level to get in. So you might say something silly like, the last pivot high, which is this kind of pivot. If price breaks up above here, then I'm going to get long and then place my short at wherever the lowest low was, as an example. Okay, so you could do something in between like that. Here's information on dark pool short positions as well. Okay, next up is stock screener functionality. So think of this being kind of similar to what you can do on FinViz, right? But you can now do with all of this OpenBB technology as well. So you can see here everything from viewing performances through to valuations, financial information, return on assets, all that kind of stuff, earnings, ownership, performance type data, and even technical analysis as well, which is interesting, but I wouldn't use this tool for TA, but that's just me. All right, so this stuff over here I find really interesting. So this is the concept of looking at insider trading. I actually find the governmental insider trading to be even more interesting than this, but this over here is looking at, what certain people, such as the C-level people within companies, are doing themselves, right? So is Elon himself buying or selling Tesla shares right now, that kind of thing. So if you're interested in that, you can use this information to mine that, but you'll see some screenshots coming up where, to me, the more interesting thing is the politicians, right? Politicians are legally above the law in this regard, where they're allowed to do insider trading legally. So the most recent example here was Nancy Pelosi, right? So she, I think, bought $8 million of NVIDIA shares, and I think 2 days after that trade was, because they have to publicly say, what they're buying or selling. So she made this huge bet on NVIDIA. 2 days later, they passed a new bill that was going to give the semiconductor industry $53 or $52 billion of funds to invigorate them in the US. So nice of her to buy NVIDIA shares right before that announcement. So that happens all the time, and that's completely legal for them. Not for us, but for them. So, but it's not illegal for us to then copycat the trades that they do, right? So here's that kind of thing, and we can look at top buys, stuff that's mostly been sold, and a bunch of other stuff over here. And I've got some screenshots showing you exactly that. So you can see here the last trades, and then they don't tell you exactly how much in this particular tool, but they specify a range, right? So you can see here that this one here is obviously significant. He's from the House of Representatives, a guy called Mike Sherrill, and here he's basically buying somewhere in the range of 100 to 250K worth of UBS. All right, and you can see the other trades there. So to me, this one here is interesting. And of course, you could do similar kind of thing to what I said before. You could use this as a way of putting stuff on your watch list, and then fairly aggressively then getting in. If you then see price action, then confirm. Over here, we're now looking at still in stocks, but now we're looking at behavioral analysis. This is where you could do things like, the fact that you can get in through to seeing what's actually trending on, say, Twitter, right? What's the sentiment of a particular ticker based on what people are ranting on about in Twitter, or stock twits, or on Reddit, right? The WSB, this is the Wall Street Bets thing. This is where the GameStop stuff became famous, and basically these guys over here were the ones that caused the massive short covering rally on GameStop, right? And so you can tie in through to Reddit and various other things over here, FinBrain, FinHub, Sentiment Investor. I don't know why the hell you'd want to look at what Jim Cramer is saying other than doing the opposite of what he says, but I'll leave it to you to decide for that. So here we've got some more visual information over here where we've now gone into stocks, BA, and then headlines, and now you get a visual representation of sentiment over here on the y-axis. So if it's above zero, it means positive sentiment. It's below zero, it's negative sentiment. So now you can see through time, and now this is tying in through to our Amazon ticker. Okay, so you can see that this is a news report of some kind that came out, that this algo is now determining that the sentiment is negative for that, right? And then positive sentiment, very positive, neutral, very positive, and so on and so on. So you can now see, historically speaking, what the sentiment analysis is for a particular ticker. It's again up to you to decide if you want to copycat or go contrarian. Here is a similar kind of view where you can see the sentiment over here down the bottom, in terms of the reports, but then mapped against price action over here for the actual ticker that you're looking at. Okay, so as an example here, you can see that we see a couple of positive reports in terms of sentiment, and then we get a move higher. We then see more positive reports coming out over here. We in theory get some kind of move higher, but then we start to get some negative report, and you might then say, well, okay, maybe this is what followed after that particular report, and so on. Okay, but obviously it's not always going to track, but it's up to you to decide based on that. It's just information after all. Here we're looking at stock twit information. Again, stocks BA bull bear, and over here you can see that when I type this bull bear thing, it's saying, all right, out of the last 14 sentiment messages that it sees, it's going to look by default for the last 30 posts, but are people bullish or bearish? And saying in this particular case, 100% of the people that are talking about that ticker, which is Amazon in this case, are all fully bullish. All right, comparison analysis here. We've get ways to look at a particular ticker and then look for things that are similar to it in various different ways. Okay, you can see here by default, it's defaulting to telling you the other companies that it believes are similar through to Amazon, if these are the ones that you may want to trade, and various different ways to determine that comparison or that particular analysis. All right, so here one of actually I've demonstrated a few of them. So these are the commands that I'm using. So these two here are basically pulling from these two sites, whereas these things here, I think of these as AI/machine learning style methodologies to find tickers that are similar through to whatever it is that you're actually looking at there. Right, they're not always going to match, obviously. You get some visual representations here. So when you use a tsne command, which is this one up here, this gives you the list, but at the same time it's going to give you this graphical representation of the stuff. So you can see this is your ticker, then the ones that are closest in distance to that ticker are the ones that are in theory going to be most similar. All right, but you can then also see other stuff that's over here, right? And think of this purely as a distance-based concept. So if you look at, say, something like Netflix has the distance going from here to here. So think of that as 1 unit. Whereas if we then look at say Oracle, you can see that Oracle is way away from Amazon versus Netflix. So based on this, it's basically saying that Netflix is far more similar through to Amazon than something like Oracle is. Okay. Here I can put up, again, I'm in stocks CA, then here I'm using HCore, which stands for the historical price correlation. And now I can compare. So we started with Amazon, and now I can compare Amazon through to other tickers over here. So if I'm looking at, say, this, DTC, how does Amazon correlate with DTC? Well, I simply match these two together, and there's a correlation here of 0.83 or 83%, if you like. Okay, which is highly correlated. All right, fundamental analysis, if you're into that. I personally am not, but a lot of people are. So you can get everything from information on the company here, market cap, all the shareholders, splits, right? A whole pile of stuff over here, all to do with fundamental analysis. So here is the stuff on due diligence. If you want to check, the prior SEC filings or anything like that. Right, analyst ratings now, and you can see that they're rating of buy, market outperform, neutral, underperform, whatever, and who those guys were. But some people like to go based on these ratings in order to confirm whether they invest in particular stocks or not. Okay, this is some stuff that's built into the platform, which I personally would not use at all, but it's there. So you can do very basic forms of backtesting with this, where you can test price hitting or crossing certain moving averages, exponential moving averages, or looking at relative strength index. Okay, we've got far more power of being able to do this in 4 or 5 lines of code with something like TradingView as an example. So I would use that instead of this by far. Same thing with technical analysis. You can see here they've got access through to a few different types of indicators, right? Bollinger Bands, Donchian channels, Keltner channels, exponential moving averages, simple moving averages, CCI, MACD, RSI, whatever. There's like maybe say a dozen things that you can get into, but again, remember that with TradingView, you've got access through to a whole pile just writing a couple of simple lines of code. But you can do it through here, I guess, as well, if you don't do any of the kind of programming stuff. Quant style analysis. So this is, I guess, the useful ones for me would be things like rolling standard deviations, or is something that would be interesting. Various forms of risk measurements, right? Some plots. I'll show you some examples of these coming up. So here's doing, if you type line, this is going to give you a line graph of the returns. Remember that we imported daily level data. So each one of these points represents daily returns in percents, right? So you can see, like, here is an extreme of, this, I'm assuming probably some kind of earnings event, okay? That went to the upside very nicely. Like this is, about 14% up, okay? Whereas this one over here, you can see it was roughly about 14% down, right? For this particular data point. So these are just daily returns. But one of the good things, I guess, is being able to use this and just visually now being able to eyeball the extreme events, and also what does normal actually mean, okay, in terms of daily price fluctuations there. Here you can see I'm looking at hist, which is histogram with a density plot there. So all that's going on here is it's creating what are called bins. So in other words, this over here is a particular bin, then this of it. So well, we've got a whole bunch of bins, right? But each one of these levels are bins, and then this represents all of the returns that are within the range from here to here. And then if they fall within this particular range, that would be inside of this bar. And then the height is based on the frequency, okay, of how many times did you get a return that fell within this particular range. Well, this many times, okay. So you tend to see graphs that look like this, and the density plot is this line over here that fits to it. But it can be also interesting to see, like, the red things over here. These are the individual kind of elements that you're seeing that fit inside of those bars, and you can see that there are some outliers, just like we talked about before, where you can get 14% up and 14% down, and you can visually see them within that graph there, right? Whereas in general, the majority of the stuff is going to fit roughly within this kind of zone there. All right, this is a box plot. A box plot, very, very briefly, and they can kind of vary in terms of how they're drawn, but roughly speaking, the distance between this and this encapsulates 50% of all of the actual returns. The line is the median, okay? Then this typically represents, like, think of this as a 25% and the other 25% up and down. And then the little diamond type thingies are considered to be outlier returns that don't fit in through to this zone. But visually speaking, if I just eyeball this, it basically tells me that, let's just say, that on March, we tend to get this thing here where you might say, well, it can potentially get through to, higher returns. But what's something else? You might say this one here is interesting, right? Because 50% of all of the returns during June are almost above zero. See that? Okay. So, you know, and if we had, you know, a box plot that had the box like here and then looked something like this with a zero line there, you'd say, well, this is an awesome month. I want to be invested here because 50% of the returns are all clearly above zero. All right. This is a way of visualizing. All right. ACF, this command here is looking at autocorrelation. This can kind of be interesting as well. All right. So you may think of correlation as you've got, you know, ticker A and ticker B, and you want to know how these two guys compare. So you can look at the correlation. So if the correlation is, you know, whatever, 83% positive, this implies that if A goes up, roughly speaking, B will go up a decent amount as well, and vice versa. If A goes down, then B is expected to go down, you know, roughly by about 83%-ish compared through to A. So that is what you're looking at correlation. Now, with something like autocorrelation, you're actually looking at A compared to A. You might say, well, that's stupid. Isn't that just going to be a perfect match? Well, the thing is that you offset that. So you compare A through to like A at t-1 as an example, right? Or t+1 is probably a better way to think about it in this particular case, but that's, you know, future. But anyway, so what I'm getting at is when you look at something like this, what this is basically telling you is that, see how we get this level here, this bar. So this is basically saying that from one day to the next, that the move is anti-correlated through to the initial move, but basically at the very next day. So in other words, let's pretend that Amazon were to come down. Then what this is kind of suggesting is that the next day there's actually the very next day, there's pretty decent odds of a counter move against the primary move, and vice versa, right? If there's a big move up, there's a decent chance of a counter move the very next day, right? But notice it's only a one-day thing, because after that you start getting much more random style information, up, down, up, down, up, down, right? But you can see that this thing over here is actually fairly significant compared through to all of the rest at one day following the starting day. Okay, you'll see actually something very similar with SPX as well, and with all main indexes. They have a one-day mean reversion effect that's quite clear. All right, so here we've got rolling sharp. So many of you might be familiar with looking at a sharp level. The thing that most don't really click into is, you know, if I say, you know, what's a sharp of SPY, you might say, well, you know, it's roughly, I don't know, let's call it 0.7. Okay, and that might be true for a decent span of time, but the reality is that it's this number, when you say a sharp of 0.7, is at a specific day with a specific look back in time. You're saying, I'm looking at all of the price information within this amount of time over, say, the past, I don't know, 180 days from today. And then based on this, I'm then calculating my sharp, and it's come out to 0.7. So as of this day here, my sharp is 0.7. Okay, but as I then trade another period over here, the returns could be very, very different. Okay, so let's say it's super bullish. All of my returns are basically largely going to be positive. Okay, so the sharp ratio that then gets calculated for this period over here may be very, very different through to the sharp ratio that we saw here. Right? So just realize that sharp is something that is dynamic. It changes essentially day to day. So what this thing here is interesting to do is to look at the rolling sharp ratio, which basically tells you through time, this is what the sharp ratio has been. Okay, and in this case you can see it's actually been slipping down, which is not great. This thing over here, seasonal decomposition, using decompose, you get this visual look as well. For Amazon, I've just stuck everything sticking through to the same ticker just for simplicity, but the main intent of seasonal decomposition is to basically see if there's a seasonal effect with the ticker, right? You're not going to see it typically with something like Amazon, but you'll see it with, say, commodity futures and stuff like that. So, there are certain times of the year where certain, the crops are either planted or harvested, or there's certain times of the year with, say, natural gas where, people are buying it because you're moving into, wintry months, and therefore, the heating oil and all that kind of stuff is going to increase in price. So with that, you'll tend to see seasonal effects, and this is a quant method of being able to take price data but then decompose the seasonal and trend effects from the price data. Okay, so if you see very clear waves like this is basically telling you that there's a clear seasonal effect, and the same kind of thing with trending. If something that has a very strong trend component, you'll see that reflected in this thing over here. Residuals is basically stuff that's left over once you take out the effect of cycles and trend. Okay, yeah, so that's what that is. This thing over here, I guess a lot of you may gravitate towards saying, oh, cool, I've got the ability to access, think of this as, machine learning style technology in order to predict the price of tomorrow, right? Based on using all of this fancy machine learning stuff on price in the past. Feel free to explore it. I personally don't feel that there's much of an edge in doing that, but some people do. So that is what's that thing there is for. Here I'm now going to start looking at interesting stuff that we can pull with option data. So I'm now in the options section, and you can see I can have a whole bunch of commands to do interesting stuff, including fancy stuff like 3D vol plots and stuff like that, which we're about to see. So first up is looking at unusual option activity. This is when you're still kind of hunting for something that you want to trade. So by doing the UNU here, I can now see that there seems to be a fair amount of activity here with Tesla that this system is seeing as being unusual option activity, higher than normal, and that might be a reason for you to go and investigate that further. All right, then when we're dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff to do with options, obviously we have to tell it what expiration we're looking at, because an option contract is a specific contract, right? So it's at a strike and at a particular expiration. So for that, we have to tell the software exactly which expiration we want to deal with. So if you simply go in and type EXP, once you've selected, remember, we've already told it we're looking at Amazon, okay? So if I simply type EXP by itself, it's going to tell me all of the expirations that are available for Amazon options. But notice over here, I've just done the -H so I can get to see some help information on that particular command. And you can see that what we are able to do is that we can actually see and set the expiration that we actually want to choose. Okay, and we can choose that either by index using -I or using -D and then selecting a specific date, right? Selecting date. So let's have a look at that. So here you can see I'm typing EXP to see all of the actual expirations that are available for Amazon. And then in order to select a particular expiration, here I've typed EXP3, and notice that, I mean, I could have done -I3, which basically says choose the index 3, but it's smart enough to understand that without me having to provide the parameter. But I could have done -I3, or I could have done -D date. Okay, but by doing EXP3, it's basically going to select this one here, which is that expiration there. All right, and you can see that's the expiration that I've now selected. And now that I've got both the ticker and the expiration, now I've got the ability to pull out some more interesting analysis information on that, including the chain and various other things. So here I'm looking at the put-call ratio for that particular expiration, right? Which again is just the ratio between the puts and calls. Different people analyze this in different ways. I can look at the IV, well, not just IV, but basically option information over here, which includes things such as the current IV level, current IV rank, what the high and low is within that particular range, put call ratios. open interest, things like that. I can see the actual option chain itself from the software, similar to what you would see in TOS or some other broker platform. I can now get a look at the open interest across the chain of that particular expiration for both puts and calls. So you can see here calls are orange, and you can then see what the open interest is over here on the y-axis, right? So obviously there's a lot of open interest over here at this particular strike, whatever that strike is. And you can see that on the puts, which are the yellow, you can see that the majority of the open interest is at these strikes over here, which are fairly quite a way out of the money. Very similar thing for volume. Okay, so volume is just the amount of contracts that have traded on that particular day, whereas open interest are the ones that are currently open, right? So you can see those. Then this is a different way to visualize the same kind of thing. So you can see over here, the greens are the call volume and the call open interest, and you see those stacked when you look at these bars. And then the same thing happens with the puts, right? So you see both the open interest as well as the actual volume. So some people look at that and use that to either hone in on through to the so-called most liquid strikes. All right, because in theory the bid-ask spread should be tightest on the ones that have the most amount of open interest and volume. Other people think that there's some predictive value with open interest, right, in terms of thinking that the brokers or the market makers or whatever are going to try and pin an expiration through to the one that has the most amount of open interest, that kind of stuff, right? So the various ways to look at that from a trading perspective. This over here is going to look at the option history. So we've defined the ticker, so we've set Amazon, we've defined the expiration, but now the other thing that we can do here is that we can basically say, I want a specific strike. Okay, so here I'm basically saying, show me the history, but where the strike is the 2400. And when I do that, I now get to see the open, high, low, close, volume, open interest, and change of that specific strike. Okay, through history, how it's changed. Same thing, but now visually. So you can now see how that option changed in terms of price and in terms of the volume per day. Here's a fancy one, right? This is the vol surface. So you can see this axis over here is the strike. This axis over here is the days to expiration. And then this axis over here is the implied volatility, right? So by looking at this, you can tell this is what people call the vol surface, right, of the entire thing. Okay, so similar to getting price history, we can also get history on Greeks. So here I do gr hist, I tell it the strike that I want the history for, and now in this particular case, it's defaulting. So if you check the help for this command, it defaults through to delta, being the primary Greek that you. So here you can see I'm basically saying gr hist and then a strike. If I don't supply any other data, then it's going to default through to tracking delta. But notice that if the usage over here basically says I can do a -G and then tell it which Greek I actually want. So if I were to have done -G, I don't know, theta, like this, then this graph over here would now be theta instead of delta historically. All right, which is kind of nice. Custom plots. So for this, if you do a -H to see what it is that you can do, you can see that I can basically say, I want to create my own plot. I want the x-axis to be one of these things, okay, as in the strike price or the IV or the open interest, the volume, you know, whatever, and then I want the y-axis to be whatever I want here. So what I did with this one over here is I basically did my own skew curve example. And you can see here, I basically said, right, I want to give me a plot. I want my x-axis to be the strike, and I want the y-axis to be the IV. And then when I do that, I basically get to see the skew. Right. This thing over here, looking at port call parity. Port call parity is, some people look at the option chain and back engineer what the so-called fair price should in theory be for a particular strike based on looking at both the put and the call options at that particular price, and then coming up with the so-called Theo price, and that Theo price is considered to be the so-called fair value. And then if the prices don't match that Theo price, some people then believe that there's a bit of an edge by trading those strikes. Okay, so it's looking at that. Then over here we can just look at Greeks. So this is similar to looking at the option chain, but now looking at the option chain with a clearer display of the Greeks for each particular strike. Payoff diagrams, which is interesting. So payoff diagram is the way that you would simulate looking at an expiration graph similar to what we would do in OptionNet Explorer. Okay, so it's kind of like a little weird to do it in this, but it's in there. So as an example, I've gone through and I've said, all right, well, give me a list of the strikes that are available, and from there I can see all of the call and all of the put strikes. From there, I've then you use the add command to add a leg. Okay, so if I do a -H to see the help on this, it basically says all you got to do is you use the add, and then you tell it the strike that you're interested in, and you can do that. The easiest way to do that is by using the index. So you can see here I basically said, okay, I want to add a leg, and I want to use the index 68 over here, and I'm using a put for that, and then you can see that it's basically selected that particular put. And by the way, the indexes are based on the number over here, right? This is the index for a particular line. So in my case, I'd said it's the index 68, and then over here I've added a I'm also adding a put. I'm doing the -S to tell it that it's a short instead of being a long, and then I'm using index 78 from that particular list, and then that's now adding the other one. So you can see I've now got two legs, and a short and a long leg is what? It's a vertical, right? And you can see that I can now plot that out, and it shows you the expiration line for that particular trade. Obviously we would use OptionNet Explorer or TDA or something like this. We wouldn't be using this for this, but that's what it looks like. Now we'll get into exchange traded funds and getting a whole bunch of interesting stuff out of that. So if you're interested in seeing what the actual holdings are for that particular ETF, the weights, candle charts, and so on. So we've got some examples here. So if you want to discover ETFs, all right, I've gone to ETF and discover, and I can search now for top gainers, top decliners, or most active. You can see here I just typed gainers up here, and then I get the full list of the best performing ETFs, right? So on this particular day that I did it, the microsectors FANG ETN was the one that you wanted to be in, on the assumption that you thought that it was going to continue. Right, top holdings. So now in this particular case, I've chosen SPY, and then for SPY, I then type holdings, and then I can get to see what the top holdings are for that. So in this case, Apple accounts for 6.63% of SPY. Here I'm using the weights command, and then to get a visual display of the sectors for each of the holdings within the SPY ETF. Right, you can see it's primarily, technology is the biggest bucket. Candle chart of SPY and volume. All right, now moving on through to the economy section. I can get a whole bunch of, this is where we tie in through to Fred databases and stuff like that for getting information on yields and treasury stuff, and employment and all that kind of stuff. So here you can see I've typed economy and then overview. From here we get a list of all of the main indexes, I guess, primarily, right? The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, the Nikkei in Japan, the FTSE in the UK, and then a couple of important futures. Otherwise, if you want more information on the futures itself, you can just type futures and get the full list of the top movers of futures there. Here, I've gone into economy and then treasury, and I can now see the historical level of the treasury rates. Okay, so you can see here we basically got down to pretty much 0, and now it's starting to climb back up. Yield curves. All right, so these are essentially bonds at different maturities and what the interest rate kind of level is for that particular maturity. Right, real-time sector performance here. So now we're looking at, again, we're still looking at SPY, and then we're looking to see, sorry, no, we're not looking at SPY. This is looking at all the major 10 sectors, right, which are these guys here. And then this over here is looking at the actual performance on this particular day, where I plugged in the command. You can see here that pretty much everything was getting smashed other than energy. So, you know, crude oil or whatever was going higher and everything else is getting smashed. Here we're looking at performance of sectors or industry or countries, which you can look at. So this is looking at the similar kind of information, but in a tabular thing. And the benefit of doing this is that you can now get an idea of you know, history. So you can see here that this is over the past week, past month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. All right. So that gives you, by looking left to right, it gives you an idea of the trend, essentially, of each one of these sectors as it goes through time. All right, that's just the help command on the performance. And here are some extra visuals. So you can see I'm now doing this spectrum command, and you can now see the sectors, but then you see the biggest movers within those sectors and what they are. Okay, obviously red is bad, green is good. You can look at Forex information. I didn't bother drilling into this because I'm not currently trading Forex at all. So, but those are the commands that you can get access to. You can look at mutual fund data over here. I think I do dive into some, yeah. So you can use the overview command under funds and then get to see, you know, the top performing funds for that particular day. All right, kind of weird, but they also have some alternative data sets in there. So you can see that they had information on COVID that you could tie into, and at the same time, you can also tie into, you know, GitHub style information to see, you know, the star history or, you know, repo info of programming libraries. Kind of weird to put it in, but anyway, it's in there. Econometrics. There's a bunch of stuff here which gets into, you know, fancy tests and stuff that you can do, which I did not explore too much, to be honest with you, but if you're into that kind of stuff, it's in there. Then over here, you can use this to try to construct custom portfolios as well, and also get to see, you know, risk metrics once you've constructed those portfolios to see how they did and see what the performance is and so on. I think there are better tools out there. It's, you know, Portfolio Visualizer is obviously a very, very good one. So I'd probably use that instead of this, but it's there. Okay, and then this is how you would construct it. So you can see here I've used the help command on build, and it's telling you, okay, you know, this is how you actually say the start date, you define the tickers, and you then define the weights. Okay, so you can see I just did a very simple thing here where I basically said, all right, let's do a build. The tickers are going to be SPY and TLT, so, you know, the large cap stock market and long-term bonds, and then the weightings that I'm going to do for that is 60% for SPY, 40% for bonds. So this is the typical, you know, 60-40 stock bond split. The start date, I want it to start from 2012, and the type, so the class over here, is I'm just telling it that these are ETFs. Okay, and that is basically the portfolio that I constructed. And then now that I've constructed that portfolio, I can now see rolling performance, right? So it's rolling annualized volatility, rolling annualized Sharpe, rolling beta, and the actual equity curve there. Compared to the benchmark, the benchmark they use is SPY. Okay. Close a kind of zoomed in view of just the returns. Drawdowns. Okay, so you can see here the 60-40 split took a, what is that, a maybe 28% on a daily basis drawdown on this particular day, whatever that is here. So the COVID crash, obviously. All right, Sharpe ratio. Again, rolling Sharpe ratio. This is for the custom portfolio that we've just built. And that's it.